Time now for the Sunday Talk, where we tap into the debate of the week. This week, what's going on between the Trump administration and Russia? Trump's people say it's all just a witch hunt, false news. But if they're wrong, how big of a scandal is this? To answer that, we brought on some experts this week. But first, some background.
I would have a very, very good relationship with Putin, and I think I would have a very, very good relationship with Russia.
Just what mischief is Russia up to in connection with our election?
First, the Democratic National Committee's emails were hacked and leaked to the press. Intelligence agencies said Russia did it, trying to tip the election in Trump's favor.
My God, we're Americans. This is a foreign government got involved in our election. That's like Russia attacked us.
Then came that dossier from a former British spy that, if authentic, suggests Russian intelligence actively cultivated Trump.
It was a group of opponents that got together, sick people, and they put that crap together.
Then President Obama imposed new sanctions on Russia. That same day, Trump's incoming national security advisor, Michael Flynn, called the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, later telling the White House,
"They did not discuss anything having to do with the United States' decision to impose a censure against Russia."
Turns out Flynn did talk sanctions and had to step down for misleading the White House.
General Flynn's resignation is not the end of the story. It is merely the beginning.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give?
Now, Trump's new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, is accused of lying under oath.
I did not have communications with the Russians.
But the Washington Post reports Sessions did meet with Ambassador Kislyak during the campaign, twice. The most senior justice official has now recused himself from investigations into Russian meddling. And the latest? The New York Times reports that the man who is perhaps Trump's closest advisor of all, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, met with the Russian ambassador as well. I'm joined now by our guests for some American perspective on all of this. Sasha Eisenberg is an author and political journalist. He's in Los Angeles. And Louisa Savage is an editorial director at Politico Live. She's in Washington tonight. So just trying to get a sense, we can talk about the latest curveball, Sasha, in just a sec, which of course is President Trump accusing President Obama of wiretapping him during the election campaign. But first, let's talk about the Russian so-called scandal. Is it a scandal? How big a scandal is it, do you think? Does it compare to something like Watergate, for example?
It's unquestionably a scandal. I think if you have the national security advisor quit with the acknowledgement that he lied both to the American public and to his own colleagues, including the vice president, I think that rises to the level of a scandal. And the number of people who now have been touched, both on the Trump campaign, the transition, and in the White House by all these questions about the Russian contacts, makes it pretty broad. Now, the real difference between this and Watergate, we don't know where this will end, but that it's happening so early in the Trump presidency is really remarkable. I mean, the big scandals that we think of in modern American politics, Watergate, Iran-Contra, the Monica Lewinsky scandal, they all happened in the second term of a presidency. That meant basically that Nixon, Reagan, Clinton had a term fairly unmolested by these major distractions to advance their agenda. What's happening now, I think, risks just weeks into the Trump presidency entirely dominating the attention of members of Congress, the press, distracting his own White House, depleting whatever goodwill there was in Washington to help him govern. And we risk having a presidency for however many years that happens almost entirely in the shadow of this scandal. That's remarkable.
How remarkable do you think it is, Louisa? Lots of headlines, lots of smoke. What do you think?
Well, I think we don't know yet. I think the comparison to Watergate falters a little bit because in Watergate you had a president that ordered wiretapping and break-ins to his political opponents, and we don't know what Donald Trump's role was in the hacking of the Democratic Committee's emails and the Clinton campaign's emails by agents of Russia. We do know that, as you pointed out in your setup, that the National Security Advisor was discussing sanctions with the Russian ambassador, and that's why he had to step down. Now, Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, is recusing himself from any investigations dealing with the Russians because he had two meetings, as you pointed out, with the Russian ambassador. But officials meet with, and senators meet with ambassadors all the time. We don't know what they talked about, whether it was at all, nefarious or illegal or reason for concern. Maybe it wasn't. We don't know the answers to that. And I think there's a lot here to be investigated. And I think there are a ton of questions both among Democrats and Republicans.
So, Sasha, I mean, it is a diplomat's job to speak to the powerful, a senator's job to speak to the diplomats. Why do you suspect there's something else going on here? What is it that you're most worried about? Is it Trump's motivations or Putin's?
Everything we've talked about, there's no evidence that we know yet that any of it is on its face illegal. And a lot of it is, as Louisa points out, has sort of innocuous explanations. Yes, government officials talk to diplomats. The things they talk about have to do with government policy. That's not unusual. What it is becoming remarkable, what seem to be the lengths that a lot of different people in the Trump organization have gone to lie both to their own colleagues and to the public, and now, as we learn in the case of Jeff Sessions, to a Senate committee under oath about these meetings, which if all these folks thought that they were innocuous routine meetings, it seems like we're seeing a whole lot of efforts to distract or cover them up. I think that's what makes people think that, that this can't just be a series of coincidences that all these people in Trump world had different parallel interactions with Russian entities that now they're so sheepish about that they're even lying to their own colleagues, and that the administration doesn't really have the ability to tell a coherent story about why all this was happening. I think that's what's animating a real fear that there is something there. Whether it includes the president himself, we don't know. But the way that these stories seem to get their momentum is that there are enough questions that force politicians to empower investigative bodies, whether in Congress or through the executive branch, and then people get subpoena power, the ability to summon witnesses, to demand documents, and those things often lead in all sorts of places that people didn't anticipate.
Right, and I would add to that, one of the reasons people are so concerned is President Trump has been very, he hasn't wanted to condemn the hacking, right? At first he said, well, maybe it was the Russians, maybe it was China, we don't know. Whereas the intelligence agencies were saying, yes, it was Russia. He wouldn't condemn them. He openly said, hey, Russia, if you're hacking, go after Hillary Clinton and so forth. He called on them to do it. And beyond that, he's called for a reset of relations with Russia, and his campaign was involved in pushing to change the language in the Republican National Committee's platform on dealing with Ukraine. The Republicans wanted to put in language they're calling for arming of anti-Russian Ukrainian forces. And there were reports that that the Trump campaign was against that and were actively pushing to keep that language out, which was a position much more favorable to Russia. So it's not just that there were meetings, but he was very open about taking a different policy approach. Now, he says that's common sense, that Russia and the United States have a common enemy in ISIS and in terrorism, and that they should, change their relationship. But it does add to this broader picture of why were the Russians helping him over Hillary Clinton.
We just got a couple of minutes left, but I do want to touch on the curveball that happened this weekend, Sasha, which was President Trump accusing President Obama of ordering a wiretap on him at Trump Tower or of Trump Tower during the election campaign. What do you think of that?
So we don't know what the underlying truth of that allegation is. If a wiretap was authorized, one of two things happened. Either, as President Trump alleges, it was basically a political effort by the Obama White House. That's an incredibly provocative allegation for one president to lodge as his predecessor. If it was not done for political convenience by the Obama White House, that is to say, if a wiretap were authorized through the traditional legal channels, then that would suggest that a court saw evidence that Trump was either engaged in criminal activity or was an agent of a foreign government, which would be a pretty remarkable thing to have confirmed that evidence is floating around in front of one of our foreign intelligence surveillance courts The other possibility, as has been the case with a lot of things that Trump has thrown out, either from his own mouth or on Twitter, is that it is rumor mongering, that it's his own conspiracy theorizing. This has been bubbling up in sort of right-wing media in the U.S. this week, this allegation that the Obama White House was trying to sort of actively and illegally undermine Trump starting through the campaign. In that case, we once again have a president, as he did with allegations of voter fraud and a whole lot of other things, who's throwing out really remarkable charges without any evidence to back them. And we saw the Trump White House today try to sort of throw this on Congress's lap, telling them to investigate and saying that they won't talk about it any further, which I suspect is not an answer that the media will take as an instruction really to be quiet, or that Congress will be too happy about.
Louisa, how did you read it, and what will you be watching for now?
I think it's false. The President Obama spokesman has come out and said this is absolutely flatly untrue. The former director of national intelligence has come out and said there was no wiretapping of Donald Trump or his campaign. Now the director of the FBI came out today, the New York Times has reported, and said this is untrue, and he's called on the Department of Justice to clarify and state for the record that this did not happen. And the Justice Department, which is of course part of the Trump administration, has not done so. You have Sessions, who's recused himself, and now who under him can come out and say that this didn't happen. So I think you're going to see tremendous pushback against this extraordinary accusation that Donald Trump has said against President Obama. I think it's more likely that there was some kind of surveillance, perhaps of a server in Trump Tower, or perhaps of other people around Donald Trump as part of the investigation into what's been going on with Russia and hacking of the elections. But it seems, based on all the comments that have come out today, seems incredibly unlikely that there's any truth to this allegation.
Well, only a few weeks into this administration, a few more stories to watch. Thanks so much for being part of this tonight.